The nurse called at 2 a.m. Your mom is asking for you in room 614. My mom died 3 years ago. The phone pulled me from sleep at 2:14 a.m., the screen's glow burning my eyes in the darkness. I answered without thinking, my voice thick and confused. Hello? The woman on the other end spoke with practiced calm, the kind of voice that delivers bad news for a living. Is this Nathan Pruitt? This is Grace Kimball, night nurse at Riverside Medical Center. Your mother is asking for you. She's in room 614 and becoming quite agitated. She says she won't settle until she sees you. I sat up, my brain struggling to process words that made no sense. I'm sorry, what? There must be a mistake. No mistake, Mr. Pruitt. Patricia Pruitt, date of birth, March 15th, 1961. She was admitted this evening with cardiac symptoms. She's stable now. But she's very insistent about seeing you. She says you're her son. My mouth went dry. The room felt like it was tilting. That's impossible. My mother died 3 years ago. I buried her myself. The silence on the other end stretched too long. When the nurse spoke again, her voice had changed, losing some of its professional certainty. Sir, I'm looking at her chart right now. Patricia Pruitt, admitted at 9:37 p.m. with chest pains and arrhythmia. She's 63 years old. She has your name listed as her emergency contact with this phone number. Are you saying you're not her son? I threw off the covers, my heart pounding. I'm saying my mother, Patricia Pruitt, died of pancreatic cancer on November 8th, 3 years ago. I was with her when she died. I planned her funeral. I scattered her ashes at Lake Monroe like she wanted. So whoever is in that hospital room claiming to be my mother is lying, and you need to call the police right now. Another pause. I could hear voices in the background, the beeping of monitors, the ambient noise of a hospital at night. Mr. Pruitt, I understand this is confusing, but the woman in room 614 has identification. She has a driver's license, insurance cards, everything. And she knows things about you. Your birthday, where you work, your ex-wife's name. She's very convincing. I was already pulling on jeans, searching for my shoes in the dark. I'm coming there right now. Do not let her leave. Something is very wrong here. I hung up before she could respond and stood in my bedroom, hands shaking, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Someone was in a hospital, claiming to be my dead mother, and apparently doing it well enough to fool medical professionals. My mind raced through possibilities: identity theft, fraud, some kind of scam targeting me specifically. But how did they know so much? How did they have her information, her identification? I'd canceled everything after she died, closed her accounts, handled all the paperwork myself. I grabbed my wallet and keys, then paused. If someone was impersonating my mother, this was more than just a confused hospital mix-up. This was criminal. I needed to be smart about this. I took photos of my mother's death certificate, which I kept in a file cabinet with other important documents. I screenshot the obituary from the funeral home's website. I found the folder with the cremation paperwork and photographed every page. Then I drove to Riverside Medical Center with my phone, recording a voice memo, documenting everything as it happened. The emergency room was quiet at this hour, just a few people in the waiting area and tired staff moving through their routines. I approached the desk, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm Nathan Pruitt. I got a call about my mother in room 614, but there's been a serious mistake. The woman in that room cannot be my mother because my mother is dead. The receptionist, a young man with kind eyes and exhaustion written across his face, looked at me with concern. Let me get the charge nurse for you. He picked up the phone and spoke quietly, then gestured toward a set of doors. She's coming out to talk to you. The nurse who emerged was the same one I'd spoken to on the phone, Grace Kimball, according to her badge. She was in her 50s with graying hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen enough strange things in hospitals to not be easily rattled. But this situation had clearly rattled her. Mr. Pruitt, I'm glad you came. This is a very unusual situation. The patient in 614 insists she's Patricia Pruitt, and she has documentation to support it. But if what you're saying is true, we have a much bigger problem. Would you be willing to look at her from the doorway? You don't have to go in or speak to her. I followed her through the corridors, my stomach churning with dread and confusion. What would I see? An elderly stranger? Someone who vaguely resembled my mother? A professional con artist who'd studied photos of her? We stopped outside room 614. The door was partially open, and I could see a figure in the hospital bed, hooked up to an IV and a heart monitor. Grace stepped aside so I could see better. The woman in the bed was turned away from us, facing the window, but I could see her profile. Dark hair, though my mother's had been lighter. Similar build, similar age. She was awake, staring out at the night. "Mrs. Pruitt," Grace said gently, "your son is here." The woman turned toward us and my entire body went cold. It wasn't my mother. The face was wrong, the features different, but the resemblance was there, calculated and deliberate. Someone had chosen this woman specifically because she could pass for Patricia Pruitt if you didn't know her well. The woman's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw something flicker across her face. Recognition, fear, calculation. Then she smiled, a warm expression that looked practiced and fake. "Nathan, honey. I knew you'd come. I was so scared." Her voice was even wrong. Too high, too soft. My mother had smoked for 20 years before quitting, and her voice had carried that rasp until the day she died. I stepped into the room before Grace could stop me, my voice coming out harder than I intended. "Who are you? Because you're sure as hell not my mother." The woman in the bed blinked, confusion spreading across her face, but it was theatrical, rehearsed. "Nathan, what are you talking about? It's me. It's Mom. I know I look different. I've been sick, and I've lost weight, and I dyed my hair, but it's me. My mother died 3 years ago," I said, pulling out my phone, "and I have the death certificate to prove it." I held up the photo of the document, zooming in on the details. Name, date of death, cause of death, the signature of Dr. Raymond Fuller, who'd been her oncologist. Grace moved closer to look at my phone, her professional demeanor cracking. "Mr. Pruitt, I need to call security and administration. This is beyond my scope." The woman in the bed sat up straighter, and I saw panic replace the fake confusion. "No, wait. There's been a misunderstanding. Nathan, you're confused. You're mixing me up with someone else. I'm your mother. Ask me anything, I'll prove it." "Fine," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "What was the name of the dog we had when I was 8? She hesitated for just a moment too long. "Buddy. His name was Buddy. We never had a dog. My mother was allergic. Try again." Her face hardened, the pretense dropping away. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I have rights as a patient. You can't just come in here and harass me." Grace had her phone out now, calling someone. I could hear her explaining the situation in urgent, professional tones. I kept my eyes on the woman in the bed, studying her. She was scared, but not of me. She was scared of being caught. "Who are you really?" I asked. "And how did you get my mother's information?" She didn't answer, just looked away, her jaw clenched. Within minutes, the room was crowded. A hospital security guard, a woman who introduced herself as Diane Schultz, the night administrator, and 2 police officers who'd apparently been in the building on an unrelated call. Diane took charge immediately, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Mr. Pruitt, I need to see that death certificate." I pulled it up on my phone, along with the obituary and cremation paperwork. She examined each photo carefully, zooming in on details, checking dates and signatures. The police officers, one young and eager, the other older with a weathered face, introduced themselves as Officer Kevin Liu and Officer Stephanie Torres. Torres took the lead, her eyes sharp as she assessed the situation. "Ma'am," she said to the woman in the bed, "I need to see your identification." The woman reached for a purse on the bedside table with shaking hands. She pulled out a wallet and handed over a driver's license. Torres examined it under the light, then showed it to me. The photo was the woman in the bed. The name was Patricia Ann Pruitt. The address was my mother's old address, the house I'd sold 2 years ago. The birth date matched my mother's exactly. "This is a fake," I said, "or it's real, but fraudulently obtained." My mother's license expired when she died. I turned it into the DMV myself as part of closing her estate. Officer Liu was taking notes. "Sir, do you have any documentation of that?" "I have copies of everything," I said. "They're at my house in file cabinets. I can get them. I can prove every word I'm saying." Diane had pulled up something on her tablet, her brow furrowed. The insurance card she used when she was admitted shows active coverage. The policy number checks out as valid. Someone is paying premiums on this policy. Torres turned back to the woman in the bed, her voice harder now. I need your full legal name, social security number, and current address. The woman looked between all of us, trapped and desperate. I want a lawyer. I'm not saying anything else without a lawyer. That's your right, Torres said. But you should know that if you've been using a deceased person's identity, that's identity theft, fraud, and potentially other charges. This isn't going away. The woman pressed her lips together and turned her face to the wall. Diane spoke quietly to Grace, then turned to me. Mr. Pruitt, I'm so sorry for the distress this has caused. Obviously, we need to investigate this thoroughly. Can you provide us with copies of your documentation? I'll bring everything tomorrow. Death certificate, cremation records, estate closure paperwork, everything. I looked at the woman in the bed, anger burning through the shock. I want to know how this happened. I want to know who she is and who else is involved, because there's no way she did this alone. Torres exchanged a glance with Lou. We're going to need to take this woman into custody once she's medically cleared. The hospital is going to need to file a fraud report with their insurance company, and you're going to need to file a police report for identity theft. This is going to get complicated. She wasn't wrong. Over the next 6 hours, as dawn broke over the city, I sat in the hospital's administrative office with Diane Schultz and a detective who'd been called in, Matthew Carlson, from the fraud division. Carlson was in his early 40s, balding, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen every scam imaginable. He recorded my statement while I walked him through everything. My mother's diagnosis in 2019, her rapid decline, her death, the funeral, the cremation, the estate settlement. I showed him photos of her in her final weeks, gaunt and hairless from chemotherapy. Nothing like the woman in room 614. This is sophisticated, Carlson said, making notes. Whoever set this up had access to a lot of information. They got a real driver's license issued, which means they got past DMV verification. They reactivated her insurance policy, which means they convinced the insurance company she was alive. That takes skills and inside knowledge. Inside knowledge of what? I asked. Carlson leaned back in his chair. The death record system. See, when someone dies, there's supposed to be a chain of reporting. The doctor files the death certificate. It goes to the state vital records office. They're supposed to flag it in the Social Security database, which then gets shared with other agencies. But there are gaps, delays, sometimes failures in that system. And if someone knows how to exploit those gaps, they can resurrect a dead person's identity before the system catches up. You're saying this is organized? Like a ring of people doing this? I'm saying it's a possibility we need to investigate. One person working alone would have a hard time pulling this off. But a group with connections to the DMV, insurance companies, maybe even the Vital Records Office, they could do this systematically. The thought made me sick. How many other families are going through this? How many other dead people are walking around out there? That's what we're going to find out, Carlson said. Starting with the woman in that hospital room. Once she's medically stable, she'll be arrested and processed. We'll get her fingerprints, run her through the system, find out who she really is. Then we lean on her to give up her accomplices. I went home at 7 a.m., exhausted and furious. My apartment felt too quiet, too normal for what I'd just experienced. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at my mother's death certificate on my phone screen. 3 years. I'd grieved for 3 years, moved on with my life as much as anyone moves on from losing their last parent. And now someone had violated that grief, weaponized it, turned my mother's identity into a commodity to be bought and sold and used. I started making calls. First to my bank, to put alerts on my accounts and check for any suspicious activity linked to my mother's old information. Then to the Social Security Administration, to report the fraud. Then to the 3 credit bureaus, to freeze my mother's credit and flag her Social Security number as belonging to a deceased person. Each call was an hour of hold music, confused representatives, and eventually transfers to fraud departments. Everyone wanted documentation. Everyone wanted details. I emailed photos of the death certificate so many times I lost count. By noon, I'd discovered the scope of the damage. Someone had been collecting my mother's Social Security survivor benefits for the past 18 months. Someone had taken out 2 credit cards in her name. Someone had a checking account at a bank I'd never heard of, actively being used for transactions. The fraud was extensive and ongoing. Detective Carlson called me at 2 p.m. The woman in the hospital is awake and stable. We're taking her into custody now. She's still not talking, but we got her fingerprints. Her real name is Lorraine Vasquez, age 61, originally from New Mexico. She has a record: fraud, identity theft, forgery, going back 15 years. She's been arrested 4 times in 3 different states, served time twice. So, she's a career criminal, I said. Professional identity thief, specifically targeting deceased people. She's good at it too. She's been living as your mother for at least 18 months that we can confirm, probably longer. She's been careful, keeping a low profile, only using the identity for financial transactions. Last night's hospital visit might have been legitimate chest pains, or she might have been trying to establish medical history to support the identity. Either way, it blew up in her face when the nurse called you. What happens now? I asked. Carlson's voice was grim. Now we build the case. I'm getting warrants for her financial records, her residence, her phone records. We need to find out who else is involved. Identity theft rings usually have multiple layers. People who steal the information, people who create the fake documents, people who use the identities. Lorraine is probably just one piece. I spent the afternoon at the police station, filing formal reports and providing copies of all my documentation. The detective who took my statement, Julia Hammond, specialized in financial crimes. She was in her 30s, sharp and focused, and she asked questions I hadn't even thought of. Did your mother have any hospital visits before she died? Any recent medical records? She was in and out of hospitals for months during treatment, I said. Cancer care at University Medical Center. Mostly. That's a potential leak point, Hammond said. Medical records get accessed by a lot of people, administrators, billing specialists, insurance coordinators. If someone in that system wanted to harvest patient information, especially patients who were terminal, they'd have everything they needed: names, birthdays, social security numbers, addresses, insurance information. The idea that someone had looked at my dying mother and seen a business opportunity made me want to put my fist through a wall. How do we find out if that's what happened? We subpoena records. We look at who accessed your mother's file and when. We cross-reference with other victims, because if this is systematic, your mother won't be the only one. Over the next week, I became an expert in identity theft recovery. I learned terms like affidavit of fraud, credit freeze, DMV fraud alert, and police case number. I spent hours on phone calls, navigating bureaucracies, explaining the same story over and over. The credit card companies wanted copies of the police report. The Social Security Administration wanted notarized statements. The insurance company wanted proof of death and proof of fraud before they'd stop paying claims on the resurrected policy. Every night, I came home exhausted, my throat raw from talking, my patience worn to nothing. My ex-wife, Claire, called after seeing something about the case on local news. "Nathan, I just saw. Are you okay?" "I'm managing," I said. "It's a nightmare, but I'm dealing with it." "Do you need anything? I mean, I know we're not together anymore, but this is insane. Someone impersonating your mom." Her voice was kind, genuinely concerned, and it made my chest tight. Claire and I had divorced 2 years ago, not because we hated each other, but because grief had made me impossible to live with. My mother's death had shattered something in me, and Claire had tried to hold the pieces together until she couldn't anymore. "I'll be fine," I said. "The police are handling it. They arrested the woman who was pretending to be her." "I saw that in the article. They said it might be part of a bigger operation?" "That's what the detective thinks. They're investigating." We talked for a few more minutes, careful and polite, then said goodbye. After I hung up, I sat in the dark, thinking about how loss ripples outward in ways you can't predict. My mother's death had cost me my marriage. Now her stolen identity was costing me my peace of mind, my time, and my faith in systems I'd trusted to keep accurate records of basic facts like who was alive and who was dead. Detective Carlson called on a Friday evening, his voice carrying an edge of excitement. "We got a break. Lorraine's apartment was full of documents: IDs, social security cards, medical records, all belonging to different dead people. We're talking dozens of identities. And we found correspondence, emails, between her and at least 2 other people coordinating the operation. One of them works at a medical records company that contracts with hospitals across the state. We're bringing her in tomorrow. Did you find out how they got my mother's information? I asked. We did. Your mother's medical records were accessed by an employee named Kathleen Ortiz 9 times in the 3 months before her death, and 14 times in the 6 months after. Ortiz doesn't work in oncology. She works in billing administration. She had no legitimate reason to access those files. So she was harvesting terminal patients' information and selling it? That's what it looks like. We're executing a search warrant at her house tomorrow morning, and we're coordinating with other jurisdictions because this might be multi-state. I felt a savage satisfaction that they were closing in, but also a bone-deep weariness. How many dead people are being used like this? We've identified 38 so far, just from what we found in Lorraine's apartment. We're contacting the families now. Most of them have no idea. The fraud is usually small-scale enough to fly under the radar. A few $1,000s in benefits here, a couple of credit cards there. Spread across dozens of identities, it adds up to serious money without triggering major alarms. The news broke on Monday. Multi-state identity theft ring targeting deceased patients busted. The headlines were everywhere. My name wasn't mentioned, thankfully, but the details were close enough that people who knew me could connect the dots. My phone started ringing with friends and distant relatives who'd heard about it, all wanting to know if I was okay, if it was true, if my mother had really been impersonated. I stopped answering. Instead, I focused on the growing investigation. Detective Carlson kept me updated as the case expanded. Kathleen Ortiz was arrested at her home, her computers and files seized. A third person, a man named Gerald Finch, who worked at a DMV satellite office, was arrested for fraudulently issuing driver's licenses to identity thieves. The operation had been running for at least 5 years. The amount stolen was still being calculated, but early estimates put it over $2 million across all the fake identities. The human cost was harder to quantify. I attended a victims meeting organized by the district attorney's office, where I met other people whose dead family members had been resurrected for profit. There was a woman whose husband had been dead for 7 years, only to discover someone had been using his identity to rent apartments. A man whose infant daughter had died 20 years ago, whose social security number had been used to open bank accounts and apply for loans. A couple whose son had died in a car accident, whose identity had been used to file fraudulent tax returns. We sat in a conference room at the courthouse, a grief support group bound by a violation none of us had imagined possible. The prosecutor assigned to the case, Amanda Wright, walked us through what would happen next. She was in her late 30s, with steel in her voice and genuine anger at what had been done. These people exploited your grief and your trust in systems that are supposed to protect you. They bet that you wouldn't notice, wouldn't check, wouldn't fight back. They were wrong. We're going to prosecute this to the fullest extent of the law. Lorraine Vasquez, Kathleen Ortiz, and Gerald Finch are all facing multiple felony charges. Identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, computer crimes, forgery. We're talking decades in prison if convicted. What about the money? Someone asked. Can we get it back? Restitution will be part of any plea deal or sentence, Wright said. But I have to be honest with you, most of the money is gone. These operations spend what they steal. You'll get something back, but probably not everything. The real justice here is making sure they can't do this to anyone else. The trial took 8 months to get to court. In that time, I rebuilt my life around the constant bureaucratic nightmare of undoing the fraud. I had to get new copies of my mother's death certificate with special fraud alerts attached. I had to file paperwork with every government agency that had ever issued her documentation. I had to dispute every fraudulent charge, every fake account, every false claim made in her name. The process was exhausting and dehumanizing. Every form I filled out felt like reliving her death. Every phone call where I had to explain that no, my mother couldn't verify her identity because she was deceased felt like a fresh wound. I developed a kind of dark humor about it. How to spend a year proving your mother is dead. A comprehensive guide. My friends didn't know how to respond to jokes like that, but it was either laugh or scream, and I was tired of screaming. Lorraine Vasquez went to trial first. I attended every day of testimony, sitting in the gallery and watching the prosecutors systematically destroy her defense. The evidence was overwhelming. The fake IDs found in her apartment, the financial records showing money flowing from dead people's accounts into hers, the testimony from hospitality workers who'd interacted with her while she was posing as my mother and others. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she was just a small player, manipulated by the real masterminds. But the prosecutor brought witness after witness who'd been victimized by her specifically. I testified on the fourth day of trial. Amanda Wright walked me through the night I'd gotten the call from the hospital, my shock at seeing someone claiming to be my mother, the violation of discovering how long the fraud had been ongoing. "How did it feel?" she asked me. "To discover that someone had been living as your mother, using her name and identity, while you were still grieving her loss." I looked at Lorraine sitting at the defense table, her face carefully neutral. It felt like someone had dug up her grave and puppeted her corpse for profit. It felt like my grief didn't matter, like she didn't matter, like she was just a social security number to be exploited. It felt like a violation I don't have words for. The jury was out for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Lorraine was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. I felt nothing when the sentence was read. No satisfaction, no relief, just a hollow sense that justice had been served, but nothing had been fixed. Kathleen Ortiz's trial was faster. She took a plea deal, testifying against Gerald Finch in exchange for a reduced sentence. She got 8 years and permanent loss of her medical records access credentials. Finch went to trial and lost. He got 12 years. The news coverage eventually faded. The victims group dissolved as people moved on with their lives. I was left with filing cabinets full of paperwork documenting a crime that never should have happened, and a deep cynicism about systems that had failed at every level. A year after Lorraine's sentencing, I got a call from a reporter working on a follow-up story. She wanted to interview victims about the long-term impact. I agreed, mostly because I thought maybe someone needed to hear how this doesn't just end when the criminals go to prison. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Her name was Diana Cole, an investigative journalist with the Tribune, and she'd been following the case since it broke. "How are you doing?" she asked, pulling out her recorder. "Honestly, I'm functional. I've rebuilt most of what they destroyed. All my mother's accounts are properly closed now. The fraud alerts are in place. The Social Security Administration finally acknowledged she's deceased and stopped the benefits. But it cost me probably 500 hours of my life, and I don't know how much stress." "Do you feel like the system failed you?" she asked. I laughed bitterly. The system failed at every single point. My mother's death wasn't properly recorded. The DMV issued a license without verifying she was alive. The insurance company reactivated a policy without checking. The Social Security Administration paid benefits to a dead person for 18 months. The hospital admitted someone without verifying their identity beyond a fake ID. Yeah, the system failed. What would you want to change? Mandatory cross-referencing between death records and government databases in real time. Biometric verification for ID issuance. Better training for hospital staff on identity verification. Actual penalties for agencies that don't follow protocols. Make it harder to resurrect the dead. Diana took notes, nodding. What about the emotional impact? How do you process something like this? I was quiet for a moment, thinking. You know what the worst part is? They stole my grief. For 3 years, I'd been healing, moving forward, learning to live with the loss. Then this happened, and suddenly I was right back in it. Every phone call, every form, every time I had to prove she was dead, I was reliving her death. They didn't just steal her identity, they stole my peace. The article ran the following Sunday with the headline, "Beyond Identity Theft, How Criminal Rings Weaponize Grief." It featured interviews with several victims, including me, and a deep dive into the systematic failures that enabled the crime. It got picked up nationally. I got emails from people across the country sharing their own stories of deceased family members being exploited. Some had gotten justice like me. Others were still fighting. A few had given up entirely, beaten down by bureaucracy and exhaustion. I started answering those emails, offering advice on how to navigate the system, what documentation to gather, which agencies to contact first. It became a kind of informal support network, People helping people through a nightmare that shouldn't exist. 2 years after that phone call at 2 a.m., I was invited to speak at a conference on identity theft and fraud prevention. The audience was full of law enforcement, prosecutors, victim advocates, and policymakers. I stood at a podium and told my story again, but this time with a purpose beyond just bearing witness. The dead can't protect themselves, I said. They depend on systems to safeguard their identities even after they're gone. And those systems are failing. When someone dies, it should trigger automatic alerts across every database, every agency, every institution. There should be no gap where criminals can slip through. We have the technology. We just need the will to implement it. The speech got attention. I was contacted by a nonprofit working on identity theft prevention policy. They asked me to join their board of advisors to help shape legislation that would close the loopholes that had been exploited. I said yes, not because it would undo what happened, but because maybe it could prevent it from happening to someone else. My mother's name became associated with a proposed law, the Patricia Pruitt Identity Protection Act, requiring real-time death record integration across federal and state databases. It's been introduced in 3 states so far. It hasn't passed yet, but it's moving forward, gaining support from victims groups and good government advocates. Claire reached out again, this time asking if I wanted to get coffee. We met on a Saturday morning, the conversation cautious at first, then easier. We talked about what we'd been doing, how we'd changed, what we'd learned. "You seem different," she said. "More focused, less angry." "I'm still angry," I admitted, "but I've given it direction, turned it into something useful." "I'm proud of you," she said. "I mean it. What you're doing, helping people, pushing for changes, your mom would be proud too." The mention of my mother still hurt, but it was a different kind of hurt. Cleaner, somehow. "I hope so," I said. 3 years after that night at the hospital, Lorraine Vasquez sent me a letter from prison. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. The letter was short, handwritten on prison stationery. "Mr. Pruitt, I know you have no reason to read this or believe anything I say. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know I'm sorry for what I did to you and your mother's memory. I was part of something terrible and I can't undo it. I've spent 3 years thinking about the people I hurt, the families I violated. I don't know if that means anything to you, but I needed to say it. I'm cooperating with investigators to identify other victims, other operations like the one I was part of. It won't fix what I broke, but maybe it will help." I read the letter twice, then filed it with all the other documents from the case. I didn't respond. I didn't know what I would say. Sorry doesn't resurrect the time I lost or the peace that was stolen, but I kept the letter anyway, a strange coda to the whole nightmare. Last month, I got a call from Detective Carlson, retired now but still following the case. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "We just closed another identity theft ring, this one operating out of Florida. 52 deceased identities being used. We shut it down based on intelligence from the Vasquez case and new protocols that came out of your advocacy work. You helped make this happen." "How many families?" I asked. 52 that we know of. All of them will be contacted. All the fraud will be unwound. Because the systems are better now. The gaps are smaller. It's not perfect, but it's better." After he hung up, I sat at my desk, looking at the photo of my mother I kept there. It was from before she got sick, smiling at a family barbecue, happy and healthy and alive. "We got them, Mom," I said to the photo. "We're still getting them." The dead can't speak for themselves. They can't file police reports or dispute fraudulent charges or testify in court. They need the living to fight for them, to protect what they left behind, to make sure their identities aren't weaponized against the people they loved. That night at Riverside Medical Center, when a nurse called and said my mother was asking for me, it opened a door into a nightmare I didn't know existed. But walking through that door, fighting back, turning grief into action, it gave me purpose. It gave my mother's death a legacy beyond loss. The Patricia Pruitt Identity Protection Act passed in its first state last week. 2 more are voting on it next month. Every dead person whose identity is protected by that law is a victory. Every family spared this nightmare is proof that pain can be transformed into change. I still miss my mother every day. I still grieve what was lost. But now, when I think of her, I don't just think about her death. I think about how her name became a shield, protecting others from the violation I experienced. That matters. That helps. And on the hardest days, when the weight of it all feels too heavy, I remember that phone call at 2 a.m. I remember the shock and fury and determination to fight back. I remember that I didn't let them win. None of us did. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.